All right, kia ora koutou. It's Rachel. I'm talking here about wellbeing and activism, and today I'm really excited to have my wonderful friend Linka, who I'm always sort of saying on this channel, you know, I'm not an expert in wellbeing, I'm just here sharing my reflections. So it's really nice to have somebody whose actual job it is to look after people's wellbeing. Linka is somebody that I know through activist spaces, but since then she's gone on to become a parent and a psychotherapist, and so has lots and lots of practice thinking about wellbeing. And I'm just really excited to have a chat with you here today. So welcome, Linka. Thanks so much for coming and chatting with me.
Yay. It's nice. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Did you want to say anything else about who you are? I've sort of encouraged people who come on here not to sort of feel like they need to list all their activist credentials or anything like that. But is there anything else that I've sort of left out there that you'd like to say about who you are before we get into it?
I don't think so. I imagine it will come up.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. And so you were saying that you had been planning to do a workshop about something to do with the emotions that sit behind or drive, or I'm not sure if I got this right, but that come into play in our activism and stuff. But it didn't come into being because of COVID and stuff. So
yeah. I hope it is still going to happen. It was a retreat.
With the last person that I had on here, I just sort of opened it wide up and was like,
yeah.
Tell me your thoughts about wellbeing and activism kind of thing. So is that too broad? Do you want to start there, or do you want to sort of start with the conversations that you had for those workshops and go in that way?
Okay, I'm thinking. Maybe I'll ramble.
Yeah. Every episode I just ramble, so.
Yeah, okay. All right, we'll go with rambling. So the thoughts that I've been having, and it comes a lot from, because I'm a therapist, and when you're a therapist, you have to do a lot of therapy. So I've been going to therapy twice a week for years.
Yeah, wow.
You know, if I'd saved all the money I've spent on therapy, I would be able to buy another house. And be a capitalist landlord, but instead I've given it all to my therapist, and your
glowing mental health, or glowing
and my glowing mental health. That's right, and my mental health, which I could never. I would gladly not be a landlord for how much better I feel for having gone to therapy for years. So but part of what I have thought about in my therapy a lot, along with, you know, childhood trauma and all that stuff. But the bit that feels relevant to this is sort of figuring out what drives my activism. And because, you know, you get any two people and you show them the same situation or the same political event, and different people are going to respond differently, right? And some of us feel this burning desire to fight injustice, and other people don't. And there's got to be a reason for that. And I remember different discussions I had with different friends back years and years ago, when my whole life was revolving around activism, and sort of observing that kind of, oh, you're doing this for a different reason than me. Or you're doing it for the same reason, but what emotionally is driving you isn't quite the same thing that emotionally is driving me.
Can you think of some examples of that? Like, could you just help me? Or is it more sort of subtle than that you can?
No, I guess one of the things that drove me a lot of the time, which sounds really lame, was that it was really, really fun. And I remember noticing like, I remember I was losing interest in a particular campaign because it wasn't fun anymore. And sitting with somebody else and being like, this isn't fun anymore. I don't want to. And them being like, but the cause, I don't think it was fun for them anymore either. I don't think it was fun for any of us, but I was just like, I can't, because I've always been a person who, if you look around my house, it's a total pigsty. Cleaning up's not fun. When things aren't fun, it's really hard for me to do them. And that isn't the case for everybody. Some people are really good at making themselves do things that aren't fun, because they have to, or because they should, or I don't know. That's probably not the most relevant example, but
I think that's a great example.
But that was one of, not my only, but that was part of it. There was I might have said this to you before, but as part of my training, my psychotherapy training a long, long time ago, we did this cute little exercise. It was right at the very beginning, a kind of introductory thing, where it was about sort of our life scripts. Like sort of what is the story that you hold in your head about life and how life works and stuff. And we were asked in the lead up to this particular workshop to each bring a story, a childhood story that we really, really loved. Our favorite. What was our favorite story from childhood? Our favorite book or cartoon character or whatever, fairy tale. And I found it really, really difficult to come up with one. And actually the one that I brought wasn't really so relevant, but one of my best friends on the training, the story that she brought was Anne of Green Gables, which I also remember. I had also read Anne of Green Gables in childhood. And basically the exercise was we each talked about what our story was and kind of what it was about it that spoke to us so much and how we related to this story. And my friend talked about Anne of Green Gables, and she shared how what she remembers about Anne of Green Gables was that everything was pretty. That Anne of Green Gables, that there were flowers and there were trees, and it described the seasons, and that everything was beautiful, and the sweet relationships that were in the story, and how much, And as I listened to that, I was like, what story did you read? Because what I remember about Anne of Green Gables was the drama and the conflict and the injustice that, Anne was an orphan and she got adopted by a family who wanted a boy, so they were going to maybe send her back, and she'd been like a slave to all of these different families leading up to when she got to go and live with Matthew and Marilla. And I've read it to my daughter quite recently, and since that, and I now can see that it's true. Everything she said is true. They do beautiful descriptions of, anyway, blah, blah, blah. The point was just the difference of our take on that story, and knowing her and who she is all about the aesthetic, and she does have, she's sort of into things being nice and being beautiful. And I'm into the drama and the guts of the relationship, and like that got me thinking a lot after that particular workshop. It got me thinking about the raids, the Otawera raids, and the trauma of that time, and the conversations that I've had with people since, in the many years, 12 years since then. And I guess for me that, that was such a pivotal point in my life, and a story that I've told again and again, and told in therapy, and I can so see how my retelling of that story, what I focus on in that story as the bits that stand out for me, is my story. My story of of my life and my relationships, and the part of that story that breaks my heart when I tell it about myself, not about the world and about racism and injustice in Aotearoa, but just about Lenka and myself as a 25-year-old activist trying to make sense of something traumatic that I went through, is the same story that has occurred again and again for me. And when I listen to some of my close friends who I've talked to about that, I can hear there's a similarity there as well. That we view what we go through the lens of ourselves.
So when you say there's a story that you've gone through again and again, you mean that there's a relationship pattern or a sort of is that what you mean? So you've had that same kind of experience in different relationships or different sets of circumstances. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think I probably have to just to explain. I probably have to talk about it my story is that I tell about myself in that time is that I was frightened and I was overwhelmed, and I could feel that everyone around me was also frightened and overwhelmed. And I wanted us to be together in our fear and overwhelm. But I felt like, and when I look back on it, it's sort of still what I see, that we were all too frightened and overwhelmed to really know what to do with ourselves. And there was nobody bigger and wiser to come and hold us all together and help us find our way.
Yeah.
And so we were all like floundering babies. And I know we weren't. but there was but we all lost our way. Is kind of how I look back on that time. And that's a story that I think of from lots of different points in my life. That kind of that experience of trying very hard to be big and be grown up and be staunch and be, like I used to do the TV interviews very badly. And I was all about being big and being strong, and I wasn't scared, and I helped other people, and I looked after my friends, and I said loud things at meetings. And, I hate to think how much of a train wreck I was. I didn't, I was trying very hard to be big and competent and grown up and brave. But really I was like, where was the Springbok tour activist who came along and said, look at all these little Wellington anarchists. Back in my day in the Springbok tour, we did this, and come here and let me kind of help you find your way through. And that's my story, but that isn't what I hear from my friends as the bit that stands out. That's the bit, maybe people can relate to me generally.
Yeah, for sure.
But that isn't.
Other people have another big core piece that stands out for them as the issue. That kind of, Yeah.
And I think, that for me is, I have a real passion for the idea of like intergenerational activism and elders and but that is, I left the UK when I was 8 years old and left all my extended family behind, and that was a part of my story, was not having elders as I stuff. So
I think, I hear what you're saying about everyone having their own different version of that that story from that, state violence and stuff. And it's a shame I don't really have mine to share, because I came into the scene after that had happened. So I'm sorry that I can't kind of meet you with my own version. But I think that what you're saying is is just so true about the lack of elders and stuff. Like, I mean, that's part of the reason that I started this channel, was because I feel like so many of us, you know, are active when we're young, and then either burn out or just, you know, need to pay the rent and get busy with paid work or whatever, have children and don't have time to go to meetings from 7 till 9 every Thursday or whatever. And that stuff doesn't get passed on, that experience doesn't get passed on and stuff. And so I think, yeah, regardless of what people might focus on from that event, I think that insight is just so incredibly true, that if there had been more people with experience or resources that you could have drawn on, it would have made a big difference, eh?
It would have made it, it would have made a huge difference. And I think, I guess I'm thinking about the cultural stuff of that and being Pākehā in that time, and the lack of what I saw from that slightly outside perspective as a Pākehā person, often finding myself in Māori spaces during that time, was I saw some of that intergenerational support happening really beautifully. And I felt very anxious and aware of not wanting to sort of impose myself on those elders, and sort of that they were not there for me, although they were incredibly kind and generous to me all the time. But I felt that real lack of that from within Pākehā communities, that where were our elders? They were around, but I guess I hadn't formed the relationships with them. But,
I think that's an interesting thing for a lot of not everyone, but a lot of young activists. I was going to say, especially, you know, say if the Pākehā, you know, white people working on anti-racism, but actually for all kinds of things like queer activists or all kinds of activists, even class activists or whatever, may have some kind of real difference between them and their actual family and extended family, and not be able to look to their close familial relationships for that kind of support. And then and so then
that's right.
And then not necessarily find them in activist spaces either, because like you say, there's always those elder activists out there, but whether you actually have a chance to meet them and where they are and what they're up to, and how many baby activists they could actually hold at once.
That's it, you can, there are more baby activists than there are elders. This was so not what I imagined talking about. I'm going to attempt to ramble about the thing I imagined rambling about.
Okay, go. Good.
I can't even remember how I came to be talking about that. The thing that I imagined rambling about is the idea that I had forming in the lead up to that workshop, which was about which emotions drive us. That's right. That was which emotions drive us, and about the roles of different emotions. So I really love that movie, Inside Out, with all the little emotions.
Yeah, I know, same. Yeah.
The kids movie. I think it's brilliant.
Yeah. I'm glad you did it, actually, because I love it, but I don't have any real psych background, so I'm kind of like, from a pop psych point of view, I think it's wonderful, you know, like educating the parents as well as the kids, totally.
Yes, it's so brilliant. It's such a brilliant movie, and sadness saves the day. Which is
so good. So good.
And I think it's super accurate. Simplified, obviously, but I think it's super accurate to emotional systems and how they work. So each emotion has a different purpose, right? And happiness goes, hi, and me to you.
Mm-hmm.
And happiness, my happiness wants to see your happiness come back. And that's how we feel connected, because I come to you with my happiness and I see that you're happy to see me happy, and we're happy together.
Yeah, yeah.
There's this sort of sparkling connection of we're good that comes from that. And disgust or revulsion kind of gives that kind of gag reflex in our throat, with the tongue that like it's like, ugh, and it sets that boundary. It's like pushes away, like, no, I don't want you, go back over there, like, ugh.
Yeah, right, yeah.
And fear goes, and the urges run away, and it wants safety, it wants to be held tight and held safe and reassured. And anger, think of a dog, comes up the back of the neck and over the front, and there's that snarl, grrr, and it lunges into action. Anger gets shit done. When we're angry, we're motivated, we're charged. We want to move when we're angry. We don't want to be still. We want to move. We want to get shit done. We want to fix that problem. And that can mean violence, you know, and for
fighting
all sorts of reasons. For, you know, the fight versus flight reflex of, you know, some people have been socialized to feel that their anger means violence, and sometimes it needs to be violence, you know, but often it isn't. You know, often anger is what drives me to pick up the phone or send that email or have that conversation or get in the car and go down and meet that person and do that thing. Like it's motivating. And it feels quite powerful. It's a powerful doing emotion. Sadness or grief has that flop. Give up. There's nothing I can do. It's the end. It's over. And that's it. And sadness is often quite still. And in my sadness, I can come to you. And be sadness, which is what I loved about that movie, that sadness brings people together and allows us to support each other if we let it. If we're willing to be sad. And if I'm willing to let you be sad and don't try and unsad you with my anger or my happiness or my, if I can just. Sadness requires compassion. That's what sadness wants. And anger gets shit done. Anger feels powerful. Anger keeps sadness away. If I'm angry, I'm going to fix this problem. I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to get shit done, and I won't need to be sad because I've fixed it. Because it shouldn't be like that.
Stop, it shouldn't be like that in the first place,
It shouldn't be like that. It's not right. It's not right that
capitalism,
people are living in poverty. Capitalism, patriarchy, none of it. It's not right. It shouldn't be like that. So I'm going to fucking fix it, and you should too. And if you're not fixing it, then what the fuck is wrong with you? And let's get this. Let's fix this problem. And we need people to be angry. Because it shouldn't be like that. And we do need to fix the problem and all of that stuff. But you can't ever stop when you're running on anger like that. Like, you can't ever stop, because there's always something to be angry about. It never fucking stops.
Yeah.
There's always somebody starving to death. There's always somebody being beaten to death by a cop. There's always some fucking injustice. And I
if
can't.
you've been using it to avoid the sadness as well, then there's maybe all that sadness in there that you don't know what to do with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the sadness of the world is completely overwhelming.
Yeah.
Like, if you've actually let it in, it's completely overwhelming. And what my experience is of therapy and kind of getting in touch with some of my grief is that there is something incredibly, if we can find a safe enough space and go through that internal process of finding our grief, like the little girl in the movie, at the point that she brings her sadness to her parents, which, you know, obviously she had safe parents to bring her sadness to, she could fall into their arms and be sad.
Yeah.
And she didn't have to hold it all anymore. And I mean, this is, you know, it's so complicated, because there has to be enough safety that you have got space to be sad.
Yeah.
Because sad is vulnerable, and sad is still, and sad is not fighting or running away. It's just being. And, you know, so it's easy for me sitting on my couch with my cup of tea in my house that I have managed to pay the mortgage on this week, to say, here I am, I'm going to lament now. And it's relaxing to do so.
Yeah.
Because it isn't always that easy. Yeah, but I guess when I look back on those years of activism, there wasn't a lot of lamenting. And lamenting, I was chatting to a guy who's like an Anglican. He's part of like that cool lefty Anglican lot. And I was sort of saying some of these ideas to him, and he talked about the biblical concept of lament, that before he gets angry about anything, first he laments. And
interesting.
Yeah, I really liked that. But yeah, these ideas are really unformed, so I don't know how.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's lots to unpack.
There's something about that language that makes it somehow give yourself permission to do it, because lamenting sounds somehow sort of serious and like a valuable process or something, whereas feeling sad and bummed and just don't know what to do with yourself doesn't really sound helpful necessarily.
No, that's right. Well, and we see it as it's self-indulgent or something.
Yeah.
I can't change any of the awful things that happened yesterday. And they were wrong, and they shouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
And I can't change any of the awful things that are happening right now as we speak. And they're wrong, and they shouldn't be happening. And there is so much injustice, and I can't do anything about it. And also, there's stuff I can do, and I should do it. And I'll do my best to do it. But no matter how much I do, and I won't do very much in reality, but even if I did more, there's still more that would be wrong and would be going on, that would be awful and wrong and unfair. And yeah, and so I think that's kind of the whole crux of everything I'm talking about, is finding the space to feel the grief while still holding on to the motivation to act, and sort of the point where those two meet.
Yeah.
I was a social worker for a long time before I trained as a psychotherapist. And I worked at Women's Refuge and Rape Crisis. And a lot of the time, the people I was working with were going through abusive relationships and poverty, and a lot of my job was battling fucked up systems, was trying to help people get more money from wins, trying to get people's debts erased, trying to get people's landlords to not rip them off so badly, trying to whatever. And often I really just could not pull people out of the holes that they were in. And when I look back on that time, it was, I guess, a more, what's that word, microcosm version of my activism. You know, I was doing battle for just one person against this great big fucked up system that was really unfair. And often, I think when I look back on it now from a sort of psychotherapy lens, there was a collusion in me that if I got angry enough, if I fought hard enough, I could somehow save this person and we wouldn't have to be sad about what had already happened before. Like, and about the fact that, you know, even if I managed to get their debt erased, they were still going to be a solo mum on the DPB living in a council flat with a shit ton of trauma in their head to try and deal with while parenting traumatized children and not enough money to get by on. Like, I couldn't fix that for them. Like, I could help them get the debt that they shouldn't have had, and I could help them get into the council flat and away from the abusive ex, and I could help them whatever other immediate crises were going on. But actually it wasn't going to make it okay. But it was still useful that I did that. Like, I still needed to be done. Yeah.
I think there's heaps of stuff in there that I can relate to so much about, like, like you say, acknowledging, you know, or confronting or just looking face on at all the terrible things that are happening, and accepting our smallness in it, like accepting that we will only do a small bit, and trying to make peace with that, you know, like trying to and then how that plays out in terms of how those emotions move through us, because like you say, the anger, the observation that these things aren't right and shouldn't be happening, wants to respond. I think especially when I was younger and had a lot more energy, wants to respond with, I'm gonna fix this. There's some part of you, not a logical part, but some part of you that's like, if I just push myself as much as I can for as long as I can, we're going to fix this, kind of thing. And
part of that is the gorgeousness of feeling young and invincible and powerful. That we think we can.
And I think there's, this might be a bit of a tangent too, but when you were talking at the start about it being fun, that kind of reminded me of some of the other stuff, some of the other emotions that I was thinking coming into this conversation that can drive us, which aren't some of the more obvious ones that we think of, like anger and sadness. They're things like the sort of the sexiness of the movement, kind of thing, you know, like the like not only that it's a lot of young people who are all forming their identity and sort of around all these hot people with lots of really exciting ideas, but just also that there's something really kind of sexy and empowering of the danger of it all, and the you know, the power of it all, like you say. Those things that
which also speaks so much to, you know, I heard you say that back about it being fun, and the ridiculous privilege of that, of you know, how lucky was I that I got to have fun, you know, but it got to be fun, because you know, a lot of people are doing it because it's survival.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's complicated too, because I think it's easy, especially if we're white and we come from a middle class background. It's easy to feel like anyone who isn't white and doesn't come from a middle class background isn't also having some fun with this stuff too, eh? Like I think lots of people, you know, find it empowering. And
it is empowering. And the solidarity of it, of the camaraderie and it's and I wonder if I've got it on my notepad right in front of me. I do. I only really recently got introduced to radical psychiatry, which was a movement of psychiatrists and psychotherapists from the 70s.
Right.
And I think it's very new, but I think there was a lot of women of color involved in it, and it talks about, it uses awesome 70s language, talks about alienation versus liberation, and that alienation is created by oppression plus mystification plus isolation.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
And so oppression and isolation, you know, those are fairly self-explanatory terms. We know what those are. But mystification is the way that we are sold, the way that we have it sold to us, that our oppression is our own fault.
Yeah, yeah.
That if you just work harder, you won't be so poor. If you just are thinner, you will go further in life and won't be so unhappy about your fatness.
If you weren't basically flawed by being a woman or a person of color or whatever, then you would, or disabled or whatever. Yeah,
that's right. So and that they build on each other. That the mystification upholds the oppression, and that the isolation means that we don't kind of reality check, keeps us isolated from ourselves and stops us talking to each other about it, which keeps us mystified, which keeps us oppressed. And liberation, the formula for liberation is awareness, contact, and action. That once we're aware of our oppression, we can do something about it, and that contact with each other is what helps with the demystification. And then there's action, and which is empowering, which is connection and solidarity, and leads to liberation. And I
love that.
Yeah, I love that too. If I was organized, I'd be able to do some kind of screen share and give you a link, which I'm sure somebody will have somewhere. If you Google it, maybe we can find them. But I love, because I think it was, you know, it was a movement out of the 70s, and I don't know lots about it. And there's awesome scholars in New Zealand who do talk about social psychology, radical psychiatry. But it was challenging the ways that traditional psychotherapy was part of the mystification process. That we try and tell people that they shouldn't be so depressed, without going, well, actually, doesn't it make sense to be depressed right now in this world? And that that together we find a way out of it. And I just heard something the other day that was challenging the term emotional regulation, which is, you know, a term that gets used all the time. I just had an argument with a psychiatrist about one of my clients yesterday, and the psychiatrist, I was I was saying that the client needed certain services to be provided, and the psychiatrist was arguing, well, no, the client needs some self-regulation, some emotional regulation. Well, and emotional regulation is great. You know, it feels good to be able to regulate our own emotions, but also when a saber-toothed tiger is chasing you, regulating your emotions is not going to keep you alive. What's going to keep you alive is having all those emotions that tell you to run. And when you're not safe, it's gaslighting.
Yeah.
Like, it's gaslighting to,
yeah.
and I, you know, that's a buzzword, and I don't even know if I fully understand it. But yeah, if you're not safe, it doesn't make sense to regulate your emotions. It makes sense to react to the lack of safety. And yeah. So yeah. You know, so PTSD, you know, when we've got trauma that is behind us and the trauma is all over and we're still reacting as if the trauma is still happening, though the trauma is all over and finished and we're safe now, then yeah, that's all good. But often the trauma isn't all over. The trauma's going to stay.
Yeah.
You know, we're still living under capitalism. We're still, it's, yeah, the trauma's still going. So, going, shh, you're safe now. You don't need to do all this reacting anymore. It's a head fuck.
Yeah. Yeah. That kind of makes me think it's interesting, like, there's lots of things I'd like to talk about on this YouTube channel, and I don't know where it'll go exactly, but it's interesting sort of looking around at what's out there already for wellbeing for activists, and a lot of it is, well, there's not a lot, but the stuff that I have seen is things kind of that are more focused on sort of like yoga and meditation and kind of like, I guess things that help soothe. And I mean, those are great things. I think those are the great things. And I keep feeling like on this channel, I tend to be talking less about that stuff and more about, here's a whole bunch of problems that I see happening in our scenes, which is, or things that I've struggled with in our scenes kind of thing, which I sometimes think is maybe not that focused on well-being. But I don't know, I guess this is slightly different than what you're talking about, but I guess it's just making me think again about the way that sometimes we just need to be with what is, I guess, rather than trying to smooth over it kind of thing, and yeah, and gentle down our feelings about it sometimes. Yeah, I guess what I'm hearing you say is sometimes we need to be with the feelings more kind of thing and work out what they're trying to tell us.
Yes, I guess that is what I'm saying. But I also, it's not an easy thing to do.
And like you say, there's not always space for it, eh? There's not always.
There's not always space for it externally, because we might not actually be safe for some people. But also, if we've got a whole lot of unprocessed trauma, we might not be safe internally. Yeah. So finding spaces to process that trauma and get to a place where we do feel safe internally is not something that's available to us all, and is complicated. So yeah, just because we are safe externally doesn't mean we've got enough of a sense of internal safety that lets us even really know what all of our feelings are.
Yeah, for sure.
yeah, and that part's quite complicated.
Yeah.
But yes, I guess that is the, you know, that thing of just being with it, and being with it with each other.
Yeah.
Being with it, yeah, together, and being able to provide that for each other. Because often it's too much to be with it alone, but we can be with it with somebody else's support. So how do we create spaces where we can be with each other in our grief and in our overwhelm and in our fear and in our anger? I think we're often quite good at being with each other. That's my memory anyway, is we were good at being with each other in our anger.
Yeah.
And in our action and in our productivity and in our sexiness and dramaticness and our, and in our fun.
Yeah.
But we were less good at being with each other in our despair and our hopelessness and our exhaustion.
Yeah, that's my memory of it too. And then when people were in that space, it was really isolating, like isolating to be going through, especially because you probably had 10 things on your list that you were supposed to come to the next meeting having done, and if you didn't,
and you were letting people down, and that was annoying.
Yeah.
Because they were still in busy, angry, get shit done mode. And
I know it's you might not have an answer for this, but maybe you've just got more questions than answers, which is what I have most of the time. But do you have ideas of how you wish you'd done it differently or something? Or, if you were sort of, it might just be what you've already said, but if you're sort of talking to 25-year-old Linka, what do you wish you'd kind of known? Or are there things that could have been put in place together, ways that we could have sort of done it differently that would have held some of that stuff better or whatever?
Oh, it's such a I don't know. It's such a difficult thing to look back on.
Yeah.
With all of hindsight, I think we were awesome and we were adorable, and I feel sort of heaps of love for us and where we were at, and I feel really sad. I feel sad for us too, and and I didn't know that I was sad. I didn't feel sad. I was too angry and too excited and too in love with it all, to know how sad I was, and I guess I wanted to be sad. I remember kind of little different sort of attempts at consciousness raising that we did at different times, and how much I wanted to be sad. Because oh God, I was so annoying. I wanted us to do sad together. I kind of knew that was what was missing on some level, but my attempts at doing it, I think, were just really annoying and overly intense.
It's pretty hard being asked by somebody else to just turn sad on, and to be like, okay, we're going to stop all of this rushing around stuff now. We're all just going to sit here and
let's be sad.
Yeah.
And it wasn't very safe. I can remember a few different attempts we made at creating spaces that were like that, and they kind of weren't very safe, because we kind of gave this space and kind of encouraged people to open up the vulnerability, but we didn't then really have the capacity to because you've still got 4 things on your list for the meeting on Thursday, and you better have done them.
Yeah.
Even though we've now just asked you to do SAD and,
Yeah.
you know, talk about your trauma or whatever.
Yeah.
So there was it was just all super individualistic, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We didn't know how to do that stuff. Yeah. So no, I don't know. I don't know what I would say to me back then. We did the best we could do.
Yeah.
With what we had.
Yeah.
I guess when I look back, I wish that me back then had asked for help more. But I don't know who we would have asked. Or whether we would have listened after we asked. Yeah. I'm sure I'll think of that later on today. I'm sure I'll think of them.
It's interesting. It kind of makes me think about, because there's I've never actually been to any of them, but there's sometimes like sort of little activist camp kind of things, like activist training camps and stuff. And it makes me think of while I was at Tornes, which is a sexual violence sector national organisation. The last conference that I put on before I left, I was completely burnt out, but luckily I had some wonderful people working with me to put it on. And one of them, Bronwyn Kerr, she insisted, and actually Sienna as well, insisted that we try to make it not so much focused, so it was bringing people together from all over the country who work in sexual violence response and prevention. And they insisted that it be less focused on sort of sharing resources, like here's this flyer about sexual violence prevention or whatever, and more on just nurturing the people that do this work, So we had a whole group of Māori healers in one space that people could go at any time and give koha and have a healing. And we had it on the marae at the university and stuff, which was just a lovely space to be held in anyway. And yeah, Bronwyn on the sort of the props table, instead of all the like I say, sexual violence resources or whatever, she just had all these nail polish and beautiful coloured pencils and just all these lovely little things from the Japanese store kind of thing, like pretty bookmarks and stuff that people could take for free kind of thing, just things that just were there to make people feel good kind of thing. And it almost, like, thinking back to how we were just now, it's almost like I want to put on little kind of just, let's look after the people doing the activism kind of events that just offer a great deal of gentleness kind of thing to.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which, I don't know, when I was 25, I might have thought was a bit of a waste of time. But it was interesting. It was interesting though, because how in those activist spaces there can also be there's all that solidarity and stuff, but there also can be a lot of conflict. There can be a lot of sort of like even sort of spoken but also unspoken kind of jostling for position and stuff, and same at sexual violence sector events, and it was interesting that by creating that really healing space, people were a lot nicer to each other. It felt a lot smoother between us as well. And it's interesting to think about the ways that we that by not being gentle with ourselves, we also are a lot harsher with each other, sort of thing as well, I suppose. Yeah And that makes the work harder.
Yes, it does. And I'm thinking about my relationship with my partner. And we've got 4 kids and we both work, and there's a house to keep tidy, and there's some weeks we struggled with the bills, and it's busy and it's hectic, and I really notice that when our relationship is feeling really good and we're connected and we're flowing well together and we sort of like each other, the way that I will stop what I'm doing to like give him a shoulder rub after he's just driven an hour and a half in traffic back through Wellington, because I love him and I know he's working hard and it feels good to do something nice for him. And I'll stop doing whatever I was doing that needed to be done to do that because I want to. And then he'll be feeling good because of that, and he'll get up and he'll pour me a glass of wine and he'll say, so what do we need to get done? And that sort of, that flow and that reciprocity of supporting each other and working together. And other times, how we are both in survival mode, and instead of doing that, I might look up and see him come in from the house and go, oh my God, did you not see that I vacuumed the floor? Why have you put your shoes there? Like that, like, can you not see how hard I'm working? And
all you do is get in the way of what I'm trying to do. Yeah.
and that, I mean, those are really cheesy examples, but you know, I often think about the upward spiral versus the downward spiral of when I'm in survival mode, his existence, he should be doing more. And if he was doing more, my life wouldn't be so hard. And
doesn't he care enough about me to do more?
Because look how hard I'm working, and look how tired I am, and look how many kids there are, and they're all fucking whinging at me, and help me, save me, get me out of this. And
yeah,
and it's that kind of, you know, that when a drowning person sees another drowning person, they drown them in trying to keep themselves afloat, like, and as opposed to holding together and both keeping ourselves and each other afloat. And I so feel that, yeah, when we're in that good flow and that space, we keep each other afloat and everything goes better.
Yeah.
And I'm less tired, and I can complain to him about feeling tired in a way that isn't subtly saying, fix it for me. And he can actually hear me saying that I'm tired and be empathetic towards my tiredness, because he doesn't hear my tiredness as an attack on his tiredness. And we can be tired together because we are. But I think there is a lot of that in those burnt out sectors. Professional ones where we get paid for it, and ones where we're doing it for free out of passion. A bit of like, I'm busy, I'm working hard. Well, I'm busier and I'm working harder.
Yeah. God, that's interesting. That sort of makes me think, because I often think of that kind of like, I'm busier and I'm working harder kind of thing is just an ego trap that we get into to compete with each other kind of thing, and wrap around ourselves to feel good. But thinking about it like the way you've just framed it, it makes me think that part of it is about almost like a plea for help, or almost like a self-protection kind of thing. It's like you say, the drowning person kind of position who needs everybody to know how hard they're working so that they can relieve some of their burden kind of thing. And
I think it's so that and it might be physical, like, I'm drowning, there's so much to do, let me tell you how stressed I am, and so that you can take some of my load, so that you can do more. Because if you do more, there won't be so much for me to do. And but I think it's emotional as well. It's see me, see how tired I am. And we do often, when we're all in that same space of see me, see how much I'm struggling, see how hard I am, which is what I remember from lots of those times. Yeah.
Mm.
The floundering.
Yeah. Yeah. We should probably wrap it up soon, because
We should.
you've been
We must have been
amazing
about an hour.
for ages. I think it is about an hour. Thank you so much for coming and talking about all this stuff with me, and I really, really appreciate it. I love how your mind works and hearing all your reflections and stuff. It's super cool. And I feel like it's really tempting a lot of the time, especially on things that are sort of YouTubey or whatever, to be like, and here is the 5-point answers or whatever at the end of it, even though that's not what my channel is about. So I think there's a part of my brain that's struggling to be like, how can I summarize what are the learnings for this thing? But I'm just going to go with one, which is what I feel like is coming through this whole thing is just a real, or maybe it's two sort of together, but like a real, I hear from you, a real compassion for the people who are in the struggle, and a real acceptance, I guess, of all of the different things that people are in the thick of, and like just yeah, we're doing our best, and people are doing their best, and I don't know, lots of generosity. I hear lots of generosity and self-compassion and compassion to each other, and what you're saying, which is really a gorgeous gift to, I think, give anyone listening. And I found it, soothing to, I guess, a lot of the things that had, a lot of the hard bits in me that I carry from that time, I suppose. So, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, hard bits. Oh, that's so lovely, Rachel. I wouldn't have been able to come up with a thing out of this conversation. It's nice that you could. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah.
I really, it was what I said to you when you asked me to have this conversation. I was like, I'm pretty sure there's a bunch of things that I'm trying to nut out. So being allowed to externally process has been really helpful for me to
choice.
To have someone to externally process with.
Yeah, lovely. And it's really nice to share this with an audience as well. Like, I think that people will find that interesting. So yeah. I'll just say thank you again very much for coming. It's lovely to see your face, and hopefully we'll talk again sometime soon. Maybe on here once more things are nutted out, or if you've got other things.
We can have part 2 when we've thought of all the answers.
Once we have all the answers, Stay tuned for all the answers in our next episode. Thank you everyone for joining and watching. Ka kite anō. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.